Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Expert Exchange hosted by the Houston Apartment Association, where we address real questions with expert answers. My name is Morgan Taylor. I'm the editor of Abode magazine here at HAA, and as always, I'm your moderator. Today, we have an HAA VPAL, Gina Irwin, with GWR Management to host for this session today. Thank you, Gina, for joining us.
Now, thank you for having me back.
Today is Wednesday, April 14th, and today's topic is tree care and tree maintenance. Before I turn it over to our host, I'm going to review some housekeeping items. This session today was originally scheduled with Yardi on the new apartment tour, but we are bringing you a session focused on tree care and maintenance. This series is designed to offer quick 30-minute sessions, but we will stay on as long as necessary to answer all of your questions. You may ask your questions in the Zoom chat box or in the comments on Facebook Live. If you can't stay on for long, you can find the session on our YouTube channel, HAA TV, later today. Once we answer all the questions we curated, we will get to your questions. A quick disclaimer, we are not public health experts nor attorneys. This webinar is provided for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. No member should act on the basis of any material contained in the webinar without obtaining proper legal or other professional advice specific to their situation. Please consult with your management company or property owner to address specific issues and to form your own company guidelines. With that, I'll turn it over to our host, Gina Irwin.
Thank you, Morgan, and very well done with that disclaimer that I'm surprised you don't have memorized just yet. Thank you for having me back. It's always fun to come back and host. I love doing this job. Like Morgan said, I am a vice president at large for the Houston Apartment Association for 2021. I am the president of GWR Management, and I'm excited to be here. Today, we have with us Grant Crowell from the Urban Foresters. Grant, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm excited to see your face again.
Yes.
You've been missing.
Yes. I'll less dance moves than at our normal interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm gonna read your bio because I do not have it memorized. I confess, but it's super
no
impressive.
problem.
Okay.
I don't either. I don't really know what I'm doing or where I'm going half the time. So bring me up to speed.
For our audience who don't know him, Grant founded the Urban Foresters, a Houston tree service company, in 2010. They do tree trimming, tree removal, fertilization, stump grinding, and just about anything else dealing with, you guessed it, trees. They handle residential work, neighborhood HOA trees, apartment communities, office buildings, industrial sites, city flood control areas, and even pipeline rights of way. Where trees need service, they are there. All right. Again, thank you for being with us. This is
You're welcome.
This is a hot topic. So the last expert exchange was kind of a post freeze about landscaping, and lots of questions came up about trees. And so what a better opportunity to have a tree expert. So let's talk about like tree companies 101. What is kind of some fundamental differences between a tree company and landscaping, and why is it important to have that?
Yeah, that's always my number one, question if I get asked to write an article or do anything like that, because it's a little, it's not confusing, but there's some nuance there. So workers who work for me and workers who work for a landscaping company, they're both dealing with green stuff, right? And if you are, a property manager or, someone who oversees maintenance at a property, it's little. You might just think, yeah, get the guy that does green things. But I'll tell you, no one who works for me would have the first clue how to fix a sprinkler head, right? You would not want them planting flowers. They'd probably die, right? And so there are niches within the green industry, just like there may be inside, you guys could, apartment operators could say, oh yeah, we're in the broader subset of real estate. That's our industry. But man, it's a totally different animal if you're managing an office building or an apartment community. So that's the philosophy of the difference. Specifically, you can kind of visualize this. You guys have all seen a landscaping truck and trailer running down the highway, right? Or parked at a community, right? You get this F-350 pickup or whatever, You got a trailer on the back of that, and that trailer is full of equipment. There's lawn tractors, and there's weed eaters everywhere, and blowers, and all sorts of tools. And if you think about it for a second, if I trim a bunch of limbs, I get this nice plant behind me, right? If we trim half those limbs off, where are you going to put them, right? If your whole trailer is full of lawnmowers and stuff, right? So it really comes down to the difference is it's training, number one. So like if your guy's climbing on top of a tree or on top of a building, he needs to understand harnesses and ropes and very dangerous chainsaws. And whereas, if a guy runs a weed eater all day long, he might not know how to keep himself safe at heights, might not be trained in that way. So there's training is the big difference. The second thing is what I alluded to a minute ago is equipment. When you see a tree operation like mine going down the road, you see an F750, right? This is not a pickup truck, right? And it has a huge box on the back, and that box is empty when you're going to the job. And then the box is full of wood chips on the way leaving the job. So that's the fundamental difference of what the equipment and the training for a landscaper, like I said a minute ago, my guy's probably not great at repairing irrigation or doing high-end, flowers or something. And we don't claim to do that. And I'm not disparaging landscapers by any means by saying they don't do what we do. And I think many of them would say. What is that implication for the apartment community? Well, the first thing is that you don't want an unqualified person doing work, and everyone would agree to that, right? The second thing is economically driven, right? So if my company owns the right equipment, has the right training, and you can buy from me directly for the services that you need that are related to trees, there's an economic advantage to you buying directly from me, or from let's say me, speaking as the industry, from a tree service, than say subcontracting that work through your landscape provider. Because common business knowledge, many landscapers would like to capture that revenue, right? They would like to have that tree revenue, even though they probably aren't doing enough tree work to justify owning an entire tree truck and wood chipper and training all their guys. So they'll subcontract that work, right? And you're going to pay the markup, right? So there's an economic driver to sourcing your vendors for the specific thing that you actually need. And that's where the training comes in for your on-site staff, for the people who make decisions, right? It's not just a bunch of green stuff, right? You can really save money by choosing who you buy from and ensuring, so you can ask your landscaper, do you do your trees in-house? Are you subcontracting it? There are landscape companies, I want to be very transparent, that actually own all of it, right? They're far bigger than we are. They have a landscape division and a tree division, and it's all their own equipment. So you can work with a company like that, but it's not common. So okay. That's the big difference.
That makes sense. It's like using a GC to do paving work when you could use a paving company.
Exactly. Same exact thing. And sometimes you want a GC, right? Sometimes I don't want to deal with it. Just have the landscaper do it all. And, right. There's a cost there. So just what situation are your communities in?
Okay, that makes sense. Something that came up in the last session that I want to talk to you about is about decaying trees. Mm-hmm. How do you know, one, if it's decaying, and at what point does it become sort of dangerous and it needs to be pulled?
Yeah. So decay in trees is it's very important because it's dangerous. All right. This is a life safety issue. A tree has basically two main systems. All right. You can think about it like the human body. You have a skeleton, right, that holds you up. And then you have this vascular system in your body that's pumping blood around. Now, the human body's way more complicated. What did you say in the beginning, Morgan? We're not health experts. I'm not a health expert. So, but I'm going to analogize here. You have a skeletal system and a vascular system in your body. Well, trees very similar that it holds itself up. When you look at a tree, have you ever held up like a limb or something? That is heavy. You know, you get a limb just not very big and it's extremely heavy. So the tree has to support all that weight, these branches all over the place, and it's holding that stuff up structurally. That's like the skeletal system of the tree. And then you have the greenness of it, the livingness, the live part of the tree. Those two systems don't necessarily are always in sync. So meaning you could have a very green tree, looks fine to me, but the tree itself could have structural issues that cause it to be very dangerous. And it could be green as green can be and break and fail structurally. So the mushroom thing and this decay idea, and like, how do I, again, like green, healthy? Well, not necessarily, right? If you start to see big cavities in a tree, and I think we might talk about this more. If you start to see strange things growing on a tree, call. You don't have to be a tree expert. We're not wanting our leasing agents and community managers to be tree experts, but to know that that doesn't look normal. The reason why it's dangerous is because the tree can have big branches fall off even though it's green. So that's why decay is important. It's a safety issue.
Okay, got it. So in the storm that we had back in February, all that atrocious weather, obviously it was, cold and wet.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe that sped up some of the possibility for decay?
It can definitely slow down the tree. So when you prune a tree and you kind of see the fresh pruning cut, and it's real, that bright colored wood right there. And then a couple of years later, you start to see that the tree is growing over that wound. It's covering up the old pruning cut. Trees are cool that way. They can compartmentalize wounds. Whereas like if you cut your arm off, right, like you're not going to grow a cover over your arm or something, right? Trees are neat that way. They can do that. So any kind of stress on a tree will slow down that ability to compartmentalize wounds that way. But as far as a direct impact to decay, it's not really, think of decay like if you have, your firewood pile, right? Or you have a log or something that's just sitting out on the lawn for a year, back behind the shed for a year, and or 2 years, and you go, hey, we're going to do a fire pit, go grab some of that firewood, and you go pick up that firewood and it just crumbles, just turns to dust, right? That's decay. All right. And when a tree compartmentalizes or closes off a wound, it stops the decay. But that's what's happening. It's just like, imagine when you have a big gaping hole in a tree, but it's 20 feet up in the air. That tree is rotting. It's just like that firewood, right? And it falls apart in your hand. Well, that's the wood that's holding up your tree is falling apart, and then the tree eventually just breaks or fails. But specific decay issues with really cold weather, probably not.
Okay. So other things to be aware of, trees for dummies again. So other signs of cavities. Other signs of decay. You mentioned cavities. Is there something else that we could sort of look for?
Yeah, any kind of strange growth. Sometimes so you'll see. I need a whiteboard. So you'll see on the bottom of a tree of these, especially big trees, right? This buttress, the roots kind of coming out, and the roots kind of going into the ground. Trees don't look like a telephone pole just popping out of the ground, right? They have this big buttress root. And when sometimes you'll look at that and you'll see all these mushrooms and cankers and stuff kind of growing off of that, or you'll actually see a hole in the tree and there's things. Those are funguses, just like the firewood pile, right? Those funguses are kind of eating the dead wood, right? They don't attack living trees, but when you have that wood that is just open to the air, right? They're decay. They're eating, right? They're funguses. I don't know how to say it another way. So that's a major sign, right? If you see a tree, and there's all these mushrooms and stuff. I have pictures of this in slides, but if you see something like that, call your tree guy, because that's a major sign of decay.
Gotcha. Mushrooms. Okay, Morgan, we
Mhm.
should have put that in the disclaimer. These are not the edible mushrooms.
Don't do that. No, I don't know. It's not a portobello, right? Like,
Don't eat them. Don't eat them. Hey, I have a question, Grant.
yeah.
What exactly does, and on-site teams might know this, but I don't. What do cavities in trees look like? Can you see them?
Yeah. I mean, it's like a hole. It looks like a little tiny cave, as the best way I could describe it,
Okay.
right? Remember how I told you when you make a pruning cut that the tree can grow over that? Certain trees are better at that than others. So that's one thing. Certain species compartmentalize better or worse. The bigger the wound, right? Like if you have a tree service come in and cut off like half of a tree, right? That's going to be tough for the tree to year over year over year grow over that before it rots, right? This is to race against time. There's also parts of a tree that you parts of trees compartmentalize better than other parts of the same tree. So meaning if you cut a limb off right in the mid, it's just a branch going out and you cut it right in the middle of the branch. The tree doesn't have the ability, the bark where you cut it in the middle of the limb doesn't do what I'm saying. It's different cells. So that's why you see pruning cuts made kind of close to the trunk of the tree because that's where the tree can grow over. But a cavity just looks like a hole. It's all it is. It's a big hole in the tree. And what happens is the hole could have originally been this size, but that decay goes into the tree and then down the trunk, right? And you'll see when you remove dangerous trees that it's not just right there, right? It's like a oh, why didn't I think of this? Duh. It's like your teeth. It's a cavity in your teeth, right? You see this little thing, the dentist sees it, but that cavity is way down deep, right? It's the same, that's the same concept. New one for my bank of tree analogies.
There you go. I love it. Okay, falling limbs. Are falling limbs a sign of a decaying or dying
Yeah,
tree, or does it just kind of happen, kind of like our
it
hair fall
can't
down?
both, right? Like decay, it's definitely decay is a lot of times the reason, right? And I'll tell you when it happens. We see a lot of falling limbs happen in the spring, right? And the reason for that is that there may be some problem in the canopy of the tree, like a cavity, a hole. This stuff is long term too. I think I should mention that. So Hurricane Ike, right? What was that, like 12 years ago?
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. I don't remember exactly the year, but that storm broke limbs and tore up trees all over the place, right? And a lot of times, we just kind of clean it up, right? Like take the broken limbs out, move on down the road. Well, where that broken limb, was kind of ripped off the tree by the wind, that's a jagged, messy wound, right? It's not this nice pruning cut, right? So 10 years later, that wound didn't really heal very well, right? Because it was ripped off the tree, not pruned off. And so 10 years later, you're having this decay that's ongoing. The tree's grown back and looks great, but it has this kind of thing on the inside that no one can tell. And that's when you start getting a limb to break off because it's not attached well anymore. And it happens in the spring because this is kind of like this is like an engineering, right? You got forces that are pushing against a structure. So the tree has a structure, right? It's held together somehow, and you have force, mainly gravity or wind, that's acting on that branch. But this weakness is slowly being overcome by the force. And the limb was fine. It was fine this year, fine the next year, fine the next year. While the leaves fall off, and you reduce a lot of weight, right? In the winter, the limbs weigh less. Imagine a imagine a bag full of imagine 100 trash bags full of leaves, right? That's a lot of weight, especially if they're green and full of moisture. Well, in the spring, the tree starts sucking water and nutrients out of the ground and pushing out all this new leaves. Well, that's new weight. It wasn't That weight wasn't there before, and then you get this breaking point. And oftentimes it's not windy, it's nothing. It's just the tree is literally putting thousands of pounds of water out on the ends of the branch, and the weakness is way back here, and then you get the failure. So that's when you get branches falling. And what you can do to help that, right, is keep the trees light. You want to prune long, heavy branches, right? You want to prune them back and reduce some of that weight so you can reduce your risk.
Well, what a beautiful, wonderful segue into my very next question.
Bam.
Bravo. Someone might think we practiced this. Pruning versus trimming.
I think that's kind of like semantics. I think it's just like pruning might be a word that's a little more, I don't know, fancy. You might want to use a word like that, right? If you're an arborist or something. But I think when we go to a job site or go do an estimate and I need a trimming bid or I need a pruning bid, it's like the same thing. It's a great point though about language and terminology. Hopefully I'm not going to step over a future question, but when we talk about the scope of jobs, right? Like if you were going to have units painted or new carpet put in, you would absolutely spec, right, the pile depth or the color or the texture of the carpet. Or I'm not a carpet guy or flooring guy, but you wouldn't just be like, hey, I need a carpet bid, and then the estimator just bids whatever he wants. The problem is we do that with trees. We do it all. I hear that all the time, right? Manager calls, regional calls, hey, I need a trimming bid. And then you're like, okay, great. Like, what are you looking for? Well, I don't know. I don't know. The owner just said we needed the trees trimmed, right? And so in order to deal with the scope clarity, tree companies kind of came up with they came up with almost like branded ways of talking about it. Like this is a class A, this is a class B, and this is a class C trimming, right? But again, right, what do you mean class A? Like how can you as the buyer go back after the job and go, whoa, I got a class B and I wanted a class A. So in order to alleviate that, we prefer to discuss actual footage or actual distances or actual, I'm going to raise the low limbs to 15 feet. And that way that I know, my tree crew knows, what do they want? Trimming limbs away from the building, 6 feet, or no, do it 10 feet because of whatever reason. The ownership group doesn't want to do this next year, or, there's all those dynamics. And so pruning and trimming, probably means the same thing to most people, but it's imperative that the contract says what is the tree service going to actually deliver in terms of distance and height and percentage of sunlight, for if you want that, right? Like we can do anything, you just have to be specific.
Sure. It's funny you say pruning, and I picture my grandmother out picking little limbs off her lemon tree, and then tree trimming, I picture a giant oak tree that's out of control, and you got to pull it back in. So it just seems to indicate that one's a little bit less
intensity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we had some guys from California come out here, a landscape company that started a division in Houston, and in California they call it lacing. What? You want to lace the tree? Like, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah, it's like when you kind of clean it out in the middle. I'm like, okay, man, like, but I'm glad I asked because I didn't have any idea what you meant, right? So
okay,
all those words, right? That it's
word.
tree cutting, tree
cutting,
tree trimming, it's all, just be specific.
Well, I love how you're talking about it. I feel like I have new pets everywhere. I mean, the language that you're using is very nurturing and loving. So my last question that I have on my list, I'm gonna check in with Morgan, see if we have anything online. In property management, we tend to just say, all right, toss $5,000 in a budget every year, $10,000, whatever it is, do it in the spring, and then, call it a day. So truthfully, really, how often should the trees be maintained? I mean, I know the easy answer is all the time, just because they're always there.
Not more than Yeah,
How
it would
often?
be it would be highly abnormal to prune trees more than once a year, and even once a year, you are a plus owner if you maintain your trees annually. And but I don't want to make value judgments. Let me not use A plus. Let's let's talk about your industry and let's talk about the goals of the ownership group. And then I could tell you how often to trim the trees. That's a key principle of, well, frankly, good salesmanship. It doesn't have anything to do with trees. It's understanding your client's goals and what are they trying to do, right? There are plenty of apartment owners who are in this thing to flip it, right? They're coming in, they're making huge impact, they're doing lots of exterior rehab, and they want to trim the bejesus out of the trees because they're going to try to flip this thing in 18 months. And they do not want to touch those trees again because they don't want that expense on their books when they show the new owners, look how badass this P&L is, right? That's great. If you will just tell me that, please tell your vendor what you're trying to do. Don't do the dance. Don't do the like, oh, well, I don't know, how cheap can you get it? It mucks up everything. Versus, let's say that first scenario where like we're not going to trim them for 3 years. So make sure you trim them real heavy up front. Versus say like an ownership group that's like, look, we're a cash flow company, we're long-term owners. These value plays that we've got, we're going to keep them forever. Well, I mean, that's really different for me as the tree guy, right? I might come in on day one when you do your exterior work, make them look real nice and capitalize that expense. But you need to do something next year because you want a predictable net operating income, and you don't want to have to every third year spend triple what you did in the first year. So annually is great. To go back to your actual tree question, annual maintenance is wonderful. Like that's how I would handle my house. That's how most ownership groups I think should look at trees is it's a budgeted expense and just deal with it because you're not saving any money. It's just growing bigger, right? You're going to spend double if not more on the second year, than if you would just keep it up all along. Um, so, but yes, the first and foremost thing is to have honest conversations about the goals and have real money conversations. Like if your sales rep is so, I'm going to get on my soapbox here. If your sales rep is such a tree expert or a paint expert he's an expert in his field, like I think you're getting hosed because he's not an expert in your field. If you don't have a vendor who knows how to talk with you about operating income or goals about, you know, that's not very helpful to you as an apartment operator. So you kind of have to have both. You don't want a guy who doesn't know anything about what he's selling you, but you need to be able to share honestly about the goals of your business. And that's what good salesmanship is listening, less of this.
I get it. That makes sense. It's more of a collaboration than it is just, tell me, regurgitate what you know as an expert.
Yeah.
Oh, this has been super helpful. I think that's the end of the questions that we had planned out. Morgan, did anything else come in the chat while we were
I
visiting?
don't have any questions in the chat or on Facebook Live, and that is the last question we had for the day. But there's one more point that I want you to make, Grant, and it was something that you included in the article that you wrote for the May abode.
Okay.
That is the fatality element of trees and what can happen when you kind of just ignore this decaying tree.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's not another part of your landscape that is, I mean, if you call pools part of the landscape, maybe pools are very dangerous things, but trees can really cause some serious life property issues, right? Especially, when they're unmaintained. Some of this kind of stuff that I'm talking about, decay and dangerous limbs, can't even be seen from the ground, right? And that's why it's another good point for annual maintenance because there's a tree guy climbing around up in there and he's going to go, uh-oh, because at least at our company, those guys are trained. They'll just take a picture and text it to the branch manager and be like, hey, we've got a problem here. You probably need to get the sales rep to add some scope. This tree might need something different than just your average maintenance. But I mean, if you've ever, our marketing guy Adam wants to do a limb drop video, like, you know, you see these like Demolition Ranch YouTube channels and whatever. He wants to drop, you know, go up in a tree and just drop varying sizes of limbs on stuff, just so people could see, like, hey, you know, this is a 2 inch, you know, a 2 inch limb, right? Not very big, but like that's like a baseball bat, right? Like if you just was like swung that and nailed somebody, right, you'd kill them. And it's true. Like that size branch doesn't have to be like the whole tree falling on you. And killing someone is, I don't want to be, you know, overly, you know, grandstanding or something, but just simply like a limb falling into the hood of your Beamer. You know, I mean, that's like, that sucks, right? Like, why did we not, that limb was dead. Why didn't that get trimmed out, right? Like that was clearly preventable. So trees are kind of unique in that way. They really do pose like a true, it's a true potential hazard in the landscape.
You just brought up something. I have my own question now.
Ah, yes.
See, this is the beauty of conversation. So can you confirm, I've always heard that if, this is for probably more for owners, if a tree on your property is dead and it falls, you have liability. If it hits a car or if it hits a person, whatever happens. If the tree is healthy and it falls just because, it's an act of nature and there's no liability.
Yes, I have. So like there's the legal perspective, and then there's going to be your insurance perspective. Like, how does the adjuster look at it? So legally, I do think if your team or someone knew that their tree was dead, right, they got a case against you. That it was obviously a problem. You get into this gray area with these decay and mushrooms and all that stuff, right? Like, I'm trying to educate people, but let's be realistic. How many apartment professionals know how to locate that or see that? It's a great case to be made for just you know, seeing, will your tree service company just do an annual inspection, right? Maybe you pay them $500 or something to check your portfolio, and that way you got a tree guy who's walked around, and you can kind of say like there were no obvious hazards. The living tree, for sure, absolutely. We get called out often to write a simple report for the adjuster. You know, this ash tree fell and hit this person's car, right? And then now there's a battle's going on kind of behind the scenes between the casualty insurance for the apartment and the casualty insurance for the automobile, and they're the ones fighting. And so they want to know, like, was this obvious or negligence on the part of the community, or was it like, hey man, the thing was green, we trim our trees every year, like, it's the car owner needs to pay for it. But yes, there is a distinction, and they're going to try, the insurance companies for sure are going to attempt to pass the buck to someone else. So as the, you know, that affects you secondarily as an owner, because typically that's why you have the insurance shield, is that you're not directly exposed to that. But you will pay more in premiums if you have all kinds of trees falling on cars eventually. But yeah, it's a great point. If there's negligence or demonstrable failure for your team or someone to do what they should have been doing, yeah, I think we get calls like that to be like the experts in the case. So I'm sure it's a thing.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, a question just popped in through the chat, so I'm going to take it. I know we're 4 minutes past, but what about moss on trees? I don't know if that was.
Yeah, so most mosses that you'll see the kind of hanging like the big beard looking moss, the Spanish moss. Maybe you've got like a property in Lake Jackson, or if anybody's watching this in deep south, you know, Louisiana, those places, that big Spanish moss. And then you have this ball moss. It looks like little spiky, like a spiky ball. Those are two different kinds of moss. Neither of those two species are parasites. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to pull it in high school biology. Parasites, right? A parasite is a thing that takes nutrients from the host, right, and like hurts it, right? The parasite's bad. Okay. Neither of those mosses I'm describing are parasites. I'm going to use another word. I think it's called a saprophyte. But don't check me on that one. What that means, if I'm wrong, here's what I'm trying to remember from my high school biology. That those two mosses, they do live on the tree, but they don't live off of it, as in like pulling. They use the tree as a place to live, meaning they're hanging there, they're attached to the tree, but they're not pulling nutrients. So is there a problem? That's probably what the question meant. Is there a problem with moss? There can be. If there's so much moss that it's actually causing shade, you can kind of think, uh-oh, shade isn't good for green things, and that it can start to cause a tree to decline. So there's like a reverse causal relationship that you think you're seeing, because many times you'll see a dead branch in the tree and the dead branch is covered with moss. Well, the moss didn't kill the branch directly, but the moss caused so much shade that the branch self-pruned. Like the tree was like, this limb isn't really doing anything for me anymore. I'm not getting much photosynthesis here, so this limb needs to go. Now, whether or not any given tree on any given property needs to have anything done about that, it's just a case by case. Like the arborist would go and be like, yeah, you should probably pull some of that off, and then you'd be fine. Good question, moss person.
Yes, great question, Sarah. Thank you for that question. Well, thank you again so much. I'm going to wrap up. I don't have any more questions in the chat or on Facebook Live. Thank you very much to Gina for stepping in again. And thank you again to our tree guy, Grant Crowell, for making an appearance for the Urban Foresters. Join us next time, Wednesday, April 28th, where we will interview Yardy on apartment tours. Until then, make it a great day. Bye.
Yes. Bye, y'all.